The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you. A man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony, to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to testify to the light. And this is the testimony of John. When the Jews from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to him to ask him, "Who are you?" he admitted and did not deny it, but admitted, "I am not the Christ." So they asked him, "What are you then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" "No." So they said to him, "Who are you? So we can give an answer to those who sent us. What do you have to say for yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the desert, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as Isaiah the prophet said." Some Pharisees were also sent. They asked him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Christ or Elijah or the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water, but there is one among you whom you do not recognize, the one who is coming after me, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to untie." This happened in Bethany across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
If you were at Mass last week and listened carefully, you might notice that this week's Gospel repeats much of what we heard last week. John the Baptist preaching in the desert, a quote from Isaiah the prophet citing John as a voice in the desert preparing the way of the Lord, John's claim that his baptism would be superseded by one who would come after him, whose sandal strap he was not able to unfasten. There are also important differences between this account we heard from John's Gospel and the account last week from Mark's Gospel. For instance, this morning we didn't hear anything about John's diet of locusts and wild honey, or about his clothing. The most striking difference between last week and this week, however, is the way John's testimony is given. This morning, as we heard, John testifies as part of a series of questions given by the leaders of the Jewish people who come to him, keeping asking him one question after another. "Who are you?" "I'm not the Christ." "Are you Elijah?" "No." "Are you the prophet?" "No." "Who are you then? Let us give an account of those who sent us." The biggest difference between last week and this week is that John this morning discloses who he is because he's being interrogated. These are the first questions, and there are 6 of them, in a gospel full of questions. John's gospel, every episode seems to be framed by a poignant question that kind of sets the tone. Soon after this earliest episode in John's gospel, we will hear Nathanael say, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Jesus asks his mother at the wedding feast of Cana, "Woman, what do you want of me?" Nicodemus will ask Jesus at night, "How can someone be born again?" The crowds will ask, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Judas offers this humdinger, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" Pilate will ask some very famous questions. "Shall I crucify your king?" Of course, Peter is asked 3 times, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples?" And then after the resurrection, Jesus will ask him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Questions, questions, questions. John's gospel is framed by questions, and they begin with these 6, which we just heard. Questions, as anybody who teaches know, I teach theology here at Notre Dame. Questions really matter because the wrong questions send us off in the wrong direction. For instance, I always get frustrated by students who ask questions when I'm teaching the book of Genesis, questions about biology or geology. The creation account really is not well served by questions about biology or geology, right? There are better questions to ask of the creation account than those questions. So the right questions allow us to dig deeply into an issue. They invite us to be honest about our appraisals. The best questions, of course, connect us to the deepest longings of our lives quite directly. And in some ways, the questions that John heard did that for him. When the leaders came to him and said, "Who are you? Are you Elijah? Are you the prophet?" They weren't just asking to see his identity card. They were seeking to understand how they should connect him to the history of Israel that went back for centuries. They wanted to see if this prophet thought of himself in line with those other prophets. And eventually, John does blurt out, "I'm a voice crying out, 'Prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness.'" He's citing the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah has been read throughout Advent, and it was our first reading today. Isaiah gives us over and over again these amazing visions of a world that might be. And he spoke to a people who were suffering terribly. So it must have been odd to hear those visions 6 centuries before. It must have been odd as well when John the Baptist quotes Isaiah, because the people of Israel suffered then too. The mighty visions from Isaiah, quoted by John the Baptist 6 centuries later, reminded me, as I was thinking this week with these readings, of the saddest words I've ever read in a book. Among the saddest. The book is Black Elk Speaks, a classic of Native American literature from the early 20th century, about the trials of the Lakota Sioux, Native Americans in South Dakota. At the end of that book, the narrator, Black Elk, a prophet sent to deliver a message to the Lakota Sioux, laments, looking back over his life. He says this, "I now see my life as the story of a mighty vision given to someone too weak to use it." Given to someone too weak to use it. The question for us in these days of Advent is this: are the visions that Isaiah gives us given to a people too weak to use them? Or can we hear these visions and let them guide us? Some of Isaiah's visions really are remarkable, right? A holy mountain where all conflict will be ended, where traditional enemies, lambs and lions, will lie down together. We hear that vision with our fellow citizens waging war at various spots on the globe. Many wonder if that's a good idea. Many more proceed with their lives as if that's not even happening. Isaiah proclaims another mighty vision: freedom for captives. Freedom for captives. We reside in a country with the highest incarceration rate in the world, 2.3 million people in prison, and the highest number of absolute prisoners in the world, much higher than China and India, which have populations that far exceed ours. Why is that in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Isaiah's oracles announce release from crippling indebtedness. Think of the many households steeped in debt. Local, state, federal governments that struggle to meet their budgets. Visions like these mighty oracles, they invite us to absolute honesty answering the questions they raise. What fears, for instance, narrow our focus so that we act selfishly instead of on behalf of the common good? What kind of ambition makes us impatient and spiteful of others who disagree with us? Conversely, in this day of Gaudete, what allows us to rejoice unselfconsciously like the children God calls us to be, God's children? The questions fall not only on us as individuals, of course, but on our church, our nation, our globe. Why does the state of our politics so disappoint us? What is it about the state of our politics that makes it difficult for us to wrestle with serious problems as serious people? Instead, we just stand on top of a problem and shout about it. Why are we so easily distracted by frivolous things? Sporting events, the escapades of celebrities. Our attention gets captured by the silliest episodes, some of them very tragic, some of them rather endearing, that take our curiosity far away from the serious things that we really do face. We giggle, we watch the E! Network while Rome burns around us. The mighty visions of Isaiah, echoed by John the Baptist, summon us to something else, to serious effort, to build a holy mountain, to free captives, to release people from indebtedness, to forge a world made new. Let us not be like Black Elk, who lamented that he was someone given a mighty vision that he was too weak to use. Let us use these mighty visions. Let us welcome our Savior with the right spirit, a spirit that undertakes to forge the vision of the world he lived and died for. That way we'll be able to welcome him Christmas morning with the right kind of rejoicing. A rejoicing in which we find ourselves participating in an ancient story made new again.